Good afternoon, and thank you for joining the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies of the University of Oklahoma in Norman. I am Debbie Odell, the Business and Virtual Program Manager, and I'm delighted to welcome you to be your host this afternoon. Our hope is that we continue the conference tradition of working to improve racial and ethnic and intercultural relations on college campuses and community organizations, providing virtual learning with opportunities like this one. For those of you joining us for the first time, NCORE has monthly webinars on the first and last Wednesday of each month. Some of the webinars are free and others are offered at a modest fee of $25. Our next webinar is on November 29th, titled New Kids on the Block, an exploration of Gen Z's identity development through mass media. This will be a free webinar and registration will open on November 15th. Please visit our website for the full list of webinars for this season. Today we have Durga Sridharan presenting Thoughts of the Little Brown Girl, Experiences of South Asian Students in Higher Education. We ask that you keep your microphones muted unless otherwise directed, and we will open a question and answer time after the presentation. Please utilize the chat box or use the raise hand feature to ask your questions. Welcome, Durga. We're excited for your presentation today.
Thank you, Debbie. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Durga Sridharan, and this is Thoughts of the Little Brown Girl, Experiences of South Asian Students in Higher Education. Welcome to this month's session of the 2023-2024 National Conference on Race and Ethnicity webinar series. Before we begin, I would like to take a minute to extend my gratitude towards NCORE for giving me the opportunity to be here and inviting me to present for this season of their webinar series. My mentors at Iowa State for their continuous support, as well as my family and ancestors who paved the way for me to be where I am today. I would also like to take a moment to highlight NCORE's inclusivity statement, as well as the land acknowledgement for Yale University. It is the expectation of the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies that all participants at NCORE enjoy a welcoming and inclusive environment, free from all forms of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. NCORE is committed to fostering an atmosphere that encourages the free expression and change of ideas. In the pursuit of that ideal, NCORE is committed to the promotion of equality and of opportunity and treatment for all NCORE participants in NCORE-sponsored events, regardless of gender identity or expression, race, color, national or ethnic origin, religion or religious belief, age, marital status, sexual orientation, immigration status, disabilities, veteran status, or body size. Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous peoples and nations, including the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, the Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac, and other Algonquian-speaking peoples have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations on this land. So here's the agenda for today's presentation. First, I would like to go more in depth with an introduction of myself, so you can all get to know a little bit about me and why I'm here today. Additionally, I will introduce the NCORE I-SCORE project and the inspiration to research the specific field. After that, I will dive into the history of South Asian American students in higher education, followed by modern day experiences of South Asian American students in higher ed. And then I will highlight the experiences of South Asian American students discussing the Asian American Identity Development Model, followed by a discussion and a piece of reflection to kind of bring all of the concepts together. And I will lead into a brief conclusion. Upon the conclusion of this presentation, you are more than welcome to ask any questions through the Q&A or via email, which I will put in the chat later. As for our learning outcomes for the session aims to encourage the recognition of systemic and systematic barriers' impact on experiences of South Asian students in higher education. Also, to implement re-examination of the Asian American Identity Development Model and emphasize value in creating more inclusive spaces, initiatives, and resources for South Asian students within higher ed. Lastly, I believe that it would probably be useful to go over some terminology to maintain a similar and cohesive sense of understanding in terms of the foundational concepts before we begin dissecting them further. So APIDA is an acronym which stands for Asian Pacific Islander Desi American. The term Asian American is a pan-ethnic term that's used to describe people living in the US who trace their roots to countries in East and Southeast Asia, as well as the Indian subcontinent. Finally, the term South Asian is used to encompass communities with roots in Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the Maldives. So now that you have a foundation of the presentation itself, I suppose it's time for me to share a little bit about myself and why I'm here. So my name is Durga Sridharan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm an alumna of Iowa State University with a Bachelor's of Science in Biology. I currently serve as a postgraduate associate at the Yale School of Medicine in the Aneja Lab. And during my undergraduate tenure, I was a George Washington Carver Scholar, and I sort of began my research journey in race and ethnicity as a first-year student by presenting at NCORE, or the Iowa State Conference on Race and Ethnicity, which is actually modeled after NCORE. Since then, I have served as an NCORE I-SCORE project student scholar, an I-SCORE planning committee member, and the NCORE I-SCORE office ambassador. One of my greatest achievements to date, encompassing all of these experiences, is presenting at I-SCORE for all 4 years of my undergrad, attending 3 NCOREs, presenting at 2 NCOREs, and now presenting at my first NCORE webinar series. I also wrote a lyrical expression that was published in the fall of 2022, and that edition of the Journal committed to social change on race and ethnicity, which I will highlight later. So the NCORE I-SCORE office provides a training and development platform through NCORE and I-SCORE experiences centered on an opportunity for Iowa State University students, faculty, and staff to engage in positive interaction and dialogue, increasing awareness, knowledge, and skills with the focus on race, ethnicity, and multicultural relations. So there are multiple divisions that are implemented by the NCORE I-SCORE office, and faculty and staff have the opportunity to participate in the Professional Development Academy, Faculty Professional Development Group, or the Professional Development Network. The NCORE I-SCORE project is a year-long initiative where student scholars attend NCORE during the summer, and then they take a fall seminar class, which is University Studies 321, and then they present at I-SCORE the following spring. So the University Studies 321 course seminar is a semester-long course which emphasizes the exploration of different aspects of race and ethnicity in the United States. Through a variety of sources, the course content highlights historic and contemporary elements of society, so social, economic, and political, as well as their interaction with the phenomena of race. With guidance from team leaders, groups of student scholars are encouraged to synthesize the information that has been learned during the NCORE experience, as well as the seminar class, to create an academic-based presentation for the Iowa State community at I-SCORE. In addition to the presentation itself, assignments and activities implemented throughout the course include reading reflections, identity development essays, the protest music immersion project, and the lyrical expression assignment, which I kind of used to spark my interest in today's presentation. Until now, my race and ethnicity focused projects have allowed me to kind of discover identities outside of my own. But it wasn't until NCORE last year where I realized that there were no presentations on my own identity as a Sri Lankan American or as a South Asian American. When the Asian diaspora was more widely known and recognized as an underrepresented or marginalized community, I had always felt like I was a minority within another minority as a South Asian American, which in turn motivated my research journey for today's project. With so many questions that were focused on why no one had implemented research in such an area before, the thought of the lack of representation and the resources to investigate South Asian student experiences in higher education never really crossed my mind, which is something that really, I guess, blew my mind while I was researching for this presentation. So for the history of South Asian American students in higher education, Dr. Viraj Patel, Director of Asian American Student Academic Programs at the University of Illinois, Chicago, investigated the history of South Asian American students with origins tracing back to the 1900s. So male farmers who settled in California would get married and continue their involvement within the working class. However, legislation directly targeted Asians from being able to own land and enter the United States. So then decades later, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 provided opportunities for only privileged and highly educated Asian immigrants. Next, Dr. Julie Park, an associate professor of education at the University of Maryland College Park, noticed a similar trend in her research, and she began to connect it with the historical and modern day model minority myth. As discovered in the Asian American Achievement Paradox by Jennifer Lee and Min Zhu, the well-educated wave of immigrants largely set the pace in terms of fostering high expectations for their children. Additionally, when analyzing statistical data, it has been evident that institutions within higher education produce reports including information about the racial makeup of newly admitted students or those who are currently enrolled. However, there is not much of an emphasis whatsoever or the desire for those officials to look into the makeup of this ethnic subgroups within the diaspora, essentially lumping all Asian identifying students together. Regarding modern day experiences, although there has been a greater push for disaggregating the racial demographic reports and increased awareness on the model minority myth and success frame mentality, research by Dr. Justin Samuel, Assistant Dean for Student Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin College of Pharmacy, expresses that there has been an influx of discrimination targeting South Asian identifying students since the events of 9/11. For instance, at Dartmouth College, an older white man directed racial slurs at 3 Indian students and physically attacked a student from Pakistan. This event did lead to a graduate and professional school town hall meeting focused on racially charged violence, but many of the students were not satisfied as a lot of the questions were left unanswered. Additionally, the graduate students were notified of the town hall only a day before, whereas the email sent to the postdocs was sent 3 hours prior to the event, and the undergraduate population itself was not included in the notice at all. Additionally, the Supreme Court began the consideration of whether universities could legally discriminate against Asian applicants in the interest of assembling a diverse student body. Furthermore, Brown University had already adopted a policy discriminating against certain Asian students in the name of non-discrimination. On December 1st of 2022, the university announced that it had added a new provision to its non-discrimination policy that explicitly prohibited caste oppression, which it described as a subtle, often misunderstood form of structural inequality. However, there hasn't been a caste-related complaint at Brown addressed up until that point. Though the intentions are in the right area, the policy itself is discriminatory and only applies to students, faculty of and staff of South Asian descent. With facing such experiences and the expectations surrounding high achievement implemented, there is immense pressure for the achievable of excellence, leading to great effects on the mental health and identity development of these students. As some of you may know, there are several frameworks and models that have explored the development of racial and ethnic identities. But with today's focus on the APIDA community, as well as South Asian students in particular, I wanted to take a deeper dive and closer look at the Asian American Identity Development Model. Dr. Jean Kim pursued an exploratory study of the development of the Asian American identity in the 1980s. And the purpose of her study was to examine how Asian American women resolved their identity conflict around being Americans of Asian ancestry, living in a predominantly white society. So the first stage of the Asian American Identity Development Model is ethnic awareness, which represents the period prior to Asian Americans entering the school system. So in this stage, awareness of their ethnicity comes primarily from interactions with family members as well as relatives. Next, we have white identification, which is stage 2. And this is marked by having a strong sense of being different from peers. This sense could be gained through encounters with racial prejudices, which in turn may lead to negative impacts on self-esteem as well as identity. The identified difference may spark a desire to escape that specific identity by identifying with white society itself. We next have stage 3, which is entitled Awakening to Social Political Consciousness. And in this phase, some Asian Americans have the ability to shift their worldview and recognize that they're not personally responsible for the way that white racism has impacted them, which then leads to a new perspective that is often correlated with increased political awareness. This then can result in the abandoning of the act of identifying with white society and understanding oppression and oppressed groups and communities. In the fourth stage, redirection, Asian Americans feel more secure to look at their own experiences through immersion in Asian American culture, history, and environment with the support and encouragement from their friends. This stage is associated with the acquisition of racial pride and a positive self-concept as Americans with an Asian heritage. Following this is the final stage, incorporation. And this serves as the highest form of identity evolution and emphasizes the confidence in one's own Asian American identity. With this in place, it allows for Asian Americans to relate to various groups of people without losing their own racial identity as Asian Americans. And additionally, there is less of a need to be exclusively with other Asian Americans, and there is a recognition that it is not the only social identity of importance to them. However, in a review that has been backed up by Kelsey Oyang, there are several limitations within this approach in itself. First, it is important to note that the subjects of Dr. Kim's study were third-generation Japanese American women. So while recognizing that the intention behind Dr. Kim's work may not have been to generalize all experiences to explain the formation of racial identity for all Asian Americans, this is how student development scholars tend to utilize her work. In the advancements of the model with roots in psychology and human development theory, this model suggests that the ethnic identity is built in sequential stages, suggesting finality. So the identity is supposedly complete after you have reached stage 5, which I guess is not the case in practice when you put this theory into practice. When compared to other development models and theories, such as the Latinx student development theory, the Asian American identity development model does not reflect the complexity of the identity development and rather shows a linear approach, whereas the Latinx student development theory explores environmental factors, such as family background and generational status, that can also play a role in affecting identity development. So after everything that we have discussed so far, I would like you to take a few minutes to ponder and reflect on the following prompts. Afterwards, we will put you into breakout rooms where you can discuss your thoughts and share your ideas and other resources that you may have personally or from your institution. And then we'll come back and do sort of a large group virtual discussion. So the first prompt asks you to list different initiatives that are currently implemented to highlight and recognize students within the APIDA community. Are there any unique activities within your institution or department? Thinking back to May, which was APIDA Heritage Month, were there things that you or your institution implemented to recognize these students? The second prompt is a little bit more broad, and this is where I would like you to think about different resources that you currently know of that are in support of South Asian students in higher education. Finally, the third prompt is more brainstorming based to see how you can support students going through identity development, or if you're a student yourself, what would you kind of like to see being offered to you in the higher ed environment? Although we previously saw the identity development model is not linear, and the act of going through identity development is not linear. Is this an accurate representation, or do you feel like there are other things that you could go through in terms of identity development in general? And through this, how could you foresee supporting students going through the act of identity development? So we'll give you a few minutes to think, and then we will put you in breakout rooms for about 5 minutes afterwards. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great discussion with your rooms, but I would like to open it up to have a large group discussion. So if we could get a few representatives from each of the breakout rooms to kind of share your thoughts and what you discussed with the people in your breakout room for each prompt, that would be great. So just to start off, the first prompt again is to list different initiatives that are currently implemented to highlight and recognize students within the APIDA community. And if there's anything that your institution has done or things that you've seen other institutions do, please feel free to share.
So I would like to jump in real quick. I was in a group of Nirja and Betsy, and we came from different backgrounds. So again, just I guess personally from the university I come from, we have a intercultural relations office, and they highlight a APIDA population through a lot of events, a lot of student engagement. But I guess one of our conversations, I'm a grad student. Another person in our group was a grad student. A lot of the conversation that has been focused has been very specific to undergraduates. And I feel like that adds another layer of like the people you are serving, the language you are using, the culture, the background, the resources, just your conversation shifts a little bit. And I feel like that has been maybe one of the aspects that was missing, because their population does not match the content that they're talking about.
Okay, I see. Yeah, thank you for bringing that point up. Anyone else from any of the other groups like to share? Feel free to unmute yourself and give your video.
Yeah, so we kind of mentioned this is Brittany, by the way. I know it shows up as April, but we're all watching it together. So here we were talking about how we'll admit some of our ignorance in like not knowing any like resources, at least here at Iowa State, for South Asian American students. So that kind of put some things into perspective for us. And I guess an idea that we tossed around was that at least here at Iowa State, we have orientation courses per major. And I think a potential option for creating some sorts of community for different groups of students would be to have those orientation courses be set up differently. Maybe like you can opt into doing one with like, you know, a broad categorization. Like we have like African American students, like Asian American students, South Asian, international students, and then having it set up like that instead of per major where, you know, you're probably going to keep your major for the next 4 years and end up developing some sort of community and rapport and kinship with those people like throughout your time there. But at least the initial contact of like coming into higher education and having that like, you know, contact of walking into a room to with a group of people who are of a common identity of yours.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's a great point that you brought up in terms of coming up with an idea to focus more on identity rather than major in terms of orientation. Something that I've noticed since I have been at Yale is that they have affinity groups for undergraduate students as well as faculty, staff, and graduate and professional students. I also did notice that there is an Asian American and Cultural Center on campus. So making sure that institutions in other places make use of their resources to better accompany for representation and different conversations regarding different races and ethnicities can go far. In terms of the second, more broad question, what were some resources that you came across that you currently know of that are in support of South Asian students in higher ed? And if you don't know of any, what are things that you believe would be useful for South Asian students?
I can jump in. So my group, we couldn't identify outside of the things that, you know, we've already been discussing around like student organizations and all of that, any other resources that support South Asian students specifically. I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think one place is to start with how is there better support for student organizations in terms of having staff or faculty advisors who are also South Asian, having support to do maybe more large scale events, support to engage in more critical conversations beyond just putting on different events as the holidays come up, but really engaging in conversations around issues that are impacting them as students. And then just general, I think, knowledge or support for learning for faculty and staff about this population and their needs, because they are wide and varied.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else like to chime in on this question? All right, if not, I will personally say that in higher education, or I guess with my experiences in higher education so far, I haven't found many resources, if any, during my undergrad that are specifically for the South Asian diaspora of students that are in the United States in higher education. And so a lot of the opportunities and things that I've been able to take advantage of, I've been coming from my own personal experience of trying to seek those resources out. A lot of times I haven't had much luck, and even with this presentation itself, I ran into the issue where there wasn't much representation and there weren't many resources to refer to in terms of really diving into the nitty-gritty details of the history and modern day experiences of South Asians in higher education. So that's like a big point, that there is not much out there. And with all the resources that we do have access to, I think it's important to make sure that even though people think it's a good thing to kind of see a group as a whole, it's just as important to understand the sub-ethnic populations that are within a group or an affinity. Finally, the third prompt was more brainstorming based to see how you can support students going through identity development in general, but also just for APIDA students in the community. So I wanted to hear what your thoughts were on that as well. If you feel comfortable putting your thoughts in the chat, feel free to do so. Otherwise, if you feel comfortable with unmuting yourself, we would greatly appreciate it.
I will quickly unmute and just point to the link that I put in the chat on the culturally engaging campus environments model. The link I put is for the original writing on that, but there have been lots of articles and testing of this model, but it is while it's focused on broadly students of color, there is a lot of utility for supporting APIDA students.
All right, thank you. Have you seen this in practice, or have you put any of this in practice?
I haven't. I'm currently a graduate student, so
Okay.
I've mostly been reading about it. I've not seen it, but I think there's some articles out there about people putting this in practice.
Okay, awesome. As a student, is there anything that you would kind of want in terms of support for identity development, or is there things that you wish you had knew before going into higher education that you would kind of pass down to someone else if you were in that leadership role?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as an undergraduate student, I felt like I had support I needed from my peers through student organizations. So in that sense, even though it was a small group, I felt supported in that sense. And then at one point we did get an advisor who was APIDA identifying, and that made a huge difference in feeling like we weren't just kind of doing everything on our own, but having someone who understood, had those same lived experiences, made a huge difference in feeling like we were supported and valued.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on this final prompt?
I do actually. You you kickstarted a great thought in my head. So I'm a graduate student as well. I guess I mean, I'm a South Asian student. I'm a graduate international student, and I guess my experience is very different also if I have to take into account my personality, because I'm not the traditional South Asian from back home. But and especially like I guess if you I mean this goes across the board. It doesn't have to just be South Asian or just anyone else, but it's just like the introversion for a lot of students, the backgrounds that people from a community come from, are very shy, or very culturally sensitive, very much over accommodating, very much making room for people and disregarding yourself, very much carrying the burden and the weight of the world with your family expectations. I mean, I know this intersects with a lot of other cultures. And I feel like just if you even from an aspect of just mental health preparedness for students, when they're stepping into a whole other culture, I guess I'm talking specifically international students, but coming from a whole other place, nobody knows how to deal with life in America, in specifically when it comes to education, when it comes to social life. They're either stuck in their community, they don't feel like they can approach or have the ability to raise their voice or speak up, which I've learned while being here long enough that it's very much encouraged, but coming from where we come from, that's not encouraged. So you can think about how this looks like if professors don't understand class participation, if students are quiet, and if students it's weird. It's like a deeper understanding that I feel like maybe even like faculty and staff would benefit from if they had gone through some sort of just like a little crash course on what it looks like to come from where your students are coming from. And then even when it comes to just giving them space and maybe additional like conversation and additional help when it comes to like, hey, initially, do you need help? Do you need support? Just going an extra mile. That extra mile helps a lot. And I felt like that I was like I benefited from that in my master's, and my PhD has been a lot more profitable because of that. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. Anyone else like to share anything? All right, if not, I will speak on that statement, but from the other perspective. So I grew up in America, but I was growing up and raised in a predominantly white area, so I didn't have much exposure to my roots or my culture. We only had very limited resources in terms of how I could relate to what my family has gone through when they were growing up in Sri Lanka before coming to the States. So I have felt kind of tied and stuck in a situation where I've felt like I'm too American, and I guess kind of building on to the white society identification portion of the identity development model. Whereas as I've gotten older, I've been able to take deeper dive with the resources that have been provided to me, but also the resources that I've been able to seek out for myself, and do a little bit more of an exploration, which is kind of why I decided on this topic for this presentation. So once again, thank you all for participating in the reflection and the discussion exercise. I really appreciate hearing your thoughts and your feedback, and learning about the different practices hosted at your different institutions, as well as all of your experiences as well. So just some food for thought. As creating more inclusive spaces, initiatives, and resources for South Asian students within higher education is highly valued. Here are just bits and pieces provided by the scholars whose previous research served as the foundation of today's session. The one that I would personally like to emphasize and endorse is bullet number 5. Encourage and engage in creative identity development reflection exercises. So kind of going back to what I was talking about earlier with University Studies 321, with the lyrical expression workshop, I was able to hone in on my personal identity development journey, where aspects did and didn't line up with Dr. Kim's proposed model. So I guess as we conclude today's session, it's important to kind of circle back to the fact that there is very minimal research regarding South Asian students in higher education, leading to the dearth of representation and the resources. So moving forward, it is imperative that we continue addressing the systemic as well as the systematic barriers faced that negatively impact South Asian students, continue analyzing and critiquing proposed identity development models, and acknowledging the importance of creating inclusive spaces and initiatives within the higher education environment and putting ideas and thoughts into practice. So as we wrap up, since I have been foreshadowing it, I thought I would share my personal lyrical expression, which kind of inspired today's presentation title, because the poem itself is called Thoughts of the Little Brown Girl. A little brown girl walks into a room, and what does she see? She says, all the eyes immediately dart at me. Shortly after, all the thinking begins, and she wonders, what's it like to be comfortable in your own skin? A room full of 30 people, she sticks out like a sore thumb. They ask, where are you from? No, where are you from? Who knew the amount of melanin in her skin would determine her worth or if she would fit in? To be made fun of her culture and name is just one thing that influences her participation in code switching. Near her family, she feels whitewashed, but around her friends, she feels too brown, which is why she feels the constant urge to get up and run away from this town. Attending a PWI, she tries to navigate her way through trying to prove herself and determine her own fate. The little brown girl becomes a token of gold for the institution whose principles seem broken. Raised in America, she should feel grateful, but at the same time, she feels like the thoughts she can't express are making her head full of confusion, like it's an illusion and it can't be real to feel what she feels. She says, the model minority myth just haunts me, but I need to fit the mold that everyone wants to see. She pretends to be perfect and strives for the best, when in reality, all she needs is just a little rest. The little brown girl just wants to build a foundation and pave the way towards success for future generations. But progress feels like one step forward and two steps back. So if that's the case, how is she supposed to get on the right track? We watch as a caterpillar turns into a cocoon, and we wait for a butterfly to blossom and bloom. But how can she do so when all that she sees is a crowd full of people overanalyzing her identity? Raised in America, she should be grateful, but at the same time, she feels like the thoughts she can express are making her head full of confusion, like it's an illusion and it can't be real to feel what she feels. But I have hope for the future and will continue to fight for other minorities to get their full rights. I will take your hands and show you the world. With warmest regards, the little brown girl. Thank you all for joining me in a discussion regarding experiences of South Asian students in higher education. If you have any questions, experiences, or resources that you'd like to share or ask, please feel free to reach out to me via email, which I will put in the chat, or for the Q&A, feel free to unmute yourself or type anything in the chat. Once again, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of the 2023 to 2024 season for NCORE's webinar series. Thank you so much.
Looks like we had someone with a hand raised.
All right, sure. I'm not sure who that was, but feel free to unmute yourself.
Niraja. It was.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was doing the clapping hands.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But thank you so much. This was truly wonderful. It was really great to hear from you and to be in this space with everyone on this very important topic.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming and sharing a little bit more about your background. I would love to stay connected with any of you. And I have put my email in the chat, so please, again, feel free to reach out with any questions, comments, resources as well.
Durga, you're amazing as always. I'm crying like a baby, just like every single time you do that poem. And AJ is yelling. We are so proud of you and send our love from Iowa State.
Thank you. All right, so if there aren't any more questions or comments, once again, thank you so much for attending today's session. And I sincerely hope that you continue to have these difficult conversations and try to look into more resources to support South Asian students in higher education or create some of your own. Once again, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.